EWTN is on location for the National Evangelization Conference. Today, Dan Burke presents Apologetics of Love.
Okay, now, our speaker this morning, Dan Burke, is the Executive Director of EWTN's National Catholic Register. The Register, along with EWTN News, the news team serves millions of people. It's phenomenal when you think about it. Millions of people around the globe through the analysis of the events of the day through the lens of the magisterium of the church. Dan has also committed his life to the advancement of faithful Catholic spirituality. You can hear him doing this weekly on EWTN's Divine Intimacy radio show. He's also the author and editor of many Catholic books and 2 imprints dedicated to authentic Catholic spirituality: the Navigating the Interior Life series through Emmaus Road Publishing, and the new Spiritual Direction series through Sophia Institute Press. Dan is the founder of the Avila Institute for Spiritual Formation, which offers graduate and personal enrichment studies in spiritual theology to priests, religious, and laity in 27 countries. You can learn more about Dan's work at SpiritualDirection.com, and I highly recommend you go there and sign up and get the daily emails from them. Finally, and most importantly, Dan is the husband of Stephanie Burke and the father of 4 children. And as I said last night, I like to share personal stories of people I did, but Dan begged me not to do that, so I'm not going to. Please join me in welcoming Dan Burke.
Well, it's great to be with you here in Birmingham. It was a long drive for me, about 20 minutes. So I'm very happy to not be flying around to speak, which I love to do, but I'm getting to be an old man, so travel takes its toll. But today I'm going to be talking to you, this morning I'm going to be talking to you about apologetics of extraordinary love. And the key phrase that I'll repeat, and I want you to remember, and it's in fact maybe the only thing I care that you remember out of this talk, is that love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. I want to share with you a little bit about my background and where I came from, and then my conversion. I'm Jewish by birth and came to Christ in my 20s. But the first time somebody heard about my conversion, just in a private conversation, they said, "Oh, well, you have to start talking about this." And I said, "Well, sure. I'm happy to do that." I gave a talk at my parish in Colorado Springs. And but there was something wrong, because when I gave the talk, it was all about my own intellectual journey. My journey from Judaism to recognizing Christ as the Messiah, which came through realizing the veracity of the New and Old Testament as a witness to God's work of redemption. And then to the apostolic fathers and the recognition that apostolic succession was necessary for a valid ordination, all of that. So I went through all of that, and I got home and I thought, that is not true. It was all true, but it wasn't the right side of the story. So I decided to change, I decided to change the way I talked about it, because I realized that if there weren't this other element in the story, I wasn't telling the whole truth, and maybe even the most important truth, and that's what I want to share with you today. So as I say, I grew up I was born to a Jewish mother in an agnostic home, and my parents were divorced when I was young, and I experienced a lot of suffering. I would say profound suffering. My suffering was on the dimension of the physical. I was ill. I was in the hospital most of my life, and still spend way more time there than I prefer. The second dimension of suffering in my childhood was in the realm of abuse. The first Catholic I ever met, in between beating my mother into the emergency room and firing a gun in our home in a fight, attempted to convince me the Catholic Church was the one true faith. And I can assure you, my friends, this is not what the church means by the new evangelization. It's an ineffective method, and kept me out of the church for a long time. And the third dimension of suffering was in the realm of spiritual. My mother was Jew, but involved in the occult, and that brought about some issues that took me a long time to shake. But I share that to set the stage for what I would call encounters with extraordinary love. At about the age of 19 or 20, and it's all a little bit fuzzy for me, I came to such great despair because of all that suffering and because it wasn't ending. When you grow up in a home like that and you're outside of the realm of abuse, the abuse doesn't stop. It stays with you, and it causes internal torment and it really caused internal torment in my life until probably in my 30s when I began to get free of that. But I was also sick and struggling, and so I just came to a point of despair. I thought, rationally, if the first 18 is going to be like, if that is the pattern for the rest of my life, then I was not a willing accomplice to that pattern, and I was considering ending my life. What a thought struck me, and you always know, looking back, what it was. Of course, it was the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit communicated to me, I think, in a way that I could say that God said to me, "You've seen evil, and you've seen darkness, and you've even seen spiritual darkness of quite an extraordinary kind. Maybe there's good. Maybe there's an opposing reality or a different reality in the spiritual realm that would give you hope and a reason to move forward." So I began a quest for truth that eventually brought me to Christ. But I want to talk about these people that helped me along the way, these people that demonstrated to me extraordinary love. First one I ran into was a guy named Mark at Pizza Hut in Phoenix, Arizona. I moved from LA to Phoenix. And growing up in that kind of an arena, when you come out of hell, you bring pieces of it with you. Well, I still had the full pie with me at that time, and the way I acted and thought towards other people, as you might imagine, was in keeping with my training. Okay, so even after I became a Christian, I'm ashamed to admit that my nickname for about a decade was among my coworkers at Focus on the Family was Nuke, short for nuclear. So that means if we got crossways with respect to how it is that we might do ministry, then you were in trouble. And so that was my nickname. So before Christ, you can imagine what that was like. So I was a little hard to get along with. And then the folks at Pizza Hut weren't all that happy about working at Pizza Hut either. And so that combination caused a kind of an uncomfortable environment. And one day I was doing the dishes, a new guy came on board, and his name was Mark, and he had finished his work early, and he shimmied up beside me and started to help me to do dishes. And then the next day, dish duty again, and Mark shimmies up beside me, and he decides to help me to do dishes and starts to strike up a little conversation with me. And then I was new there as well, and I was headed toward my first bathroom duty. And I was whining about it because I was pretty holy, And Mark said, "You don't want to do it? I'll do it for you." Now, I worked at that Pizza Hut for about a year, and I never cleaned the bathrooms. But Mark took that task on himself, cleaned the bathrooms in a public restaurant for me instead of me, which made me a little curious about him. My initial conclusion was quite negative because I had never met people who loved without condition, who really gave what we know as real love, right? And so I confronted him out back in a kind of aggressive manner regarding, I thought he was hitting on me. I thought he was gay. And at that time, there was a certain way you deal with that. It was very different than in our time. And that was to cause damage on the other person, to dissuade them from their proclivities, at least towards me. And I don't remember what I said to him, but I remember him raising his hands in fear. And he's like, no. He said, "I'm a Christian. We're supposed to be nice. This is what we do." I thought, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. So I got to know Mark a little bit. And he shared with me that he had come to Christ. He was a cocaine addict, and he was a musician. And Mark befriended me in a way that I hadn't quite experienced friendship before. All of my prior friendships were participations in destruction of some kind. of some kind, other people's property, our own bodies, whatever. And Mark was wanting to get together and study the Bible, that sort of thing. And I was moved by his testimony, and but probably more moved by his self-giving love to me and his acceptance of me and his interest in me. Now, when he said, "Hey, you want to get together and study the Bible?" I said, that's kind of gay. I don't need to be talking to another dude about how I feel about anything, right? So I didn't want to do that either. Now, I'm speaking about the way I thought back then. That doesn't represent how I think now. But Mark had a huge impact on me, and he was the first encounter with extraordinary love. And the key to think about with how he encountered now is that he didn't preach to me. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He didn't even tell me I'm a sinner, which is okay to do at the right time. But what he did is he told me he was a sinner, and he told me the reason that he was giving his love to me. He told me about his own failings, and he told me what God had done for him. Now, he tried to get me to go to church, and I remember going to one service one time and bailing pretty quick because the vibe I gave off wasn't just nobody wanted to be around me at that time. And so, but I didn't understand it, and what I just felt was rejection because I wasn't, clean cut. I still am not, but I wasn't like the other folks around me in that situation. But he had a very big impact on me. Later on, I moved back from Phoenix, and I went through a period of self-reflection. I actually think Mark was the answer to a cry out to God to show me the way. But I didn't quite get all the way there. I moved back to California, and I worked for my dad's company in L.A., and if you work anywhere in L.A., that means you spend several hours a day on the freeways. And so I was bored, and I was searching, and I'm trying to find answers. So I started listening to evangelical radio. I don't know, how many of you have heard of Chuck Swindoll? Okay, just about everybody's heard of him. How about Dr. Walter Martin? Well, one of the great things about Walter Martin is Walter was kind of a jerk. He was very direct and straightforward, which I could relate to, kind of like John Martinoni. I'm sorry. I meant to say it like John's very direct. I didn't mean to say John's a jerk. Sorry, John. But what I loved about Walter Martin was that he didn't pull any punches, and he always gave you very clear reasons, very rational, and he would give you the different views on scriptural interpretation, and he would say, and I believe this one, and this one's why. And I kind of like that. And one day he let it slip that he was a Southern Baptist. So I thought, well, maybe it's time I go check these Baptist people out. And so I just went in the Yellow Pages and kind of figured out, well, this is where I live. This is the shortest distance to a Southern Baptist church, so that must be the one I should go look at. Glen Memorial Baptist Church in Covina, California. Just a beautiful side note, I went to visit my sister's grave a few years ago during, what was the year, Pope Benedict, I think it was the year of faith, where you get an indulgence for going back to your place of baptism, I think it was. And then I went there and prayed my baptismal prayers. The church is now a Chinese church, so it's funny. I was walking down the street and I was kind of looking at it from a distance and just thinking about what God had done for me there. And they were inviting me in, and they were obviously first generation Chinese because they were saying, "We have English," So, and it was just the cutest thing. I said, "No, I've already been to Mass. I'm good." But I went around the back and right behind the font where I was baptized and renewed my baptismal vows. And but in that church, before I tell you that, so Baptists are all supposed to sit in the back, right? Do we have any Baptists in here with us? No Baptists? Well, you ever heard of the term back row Baptist, right? Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know it then, but I thought, well, I'm going to sit in the back to hide out because surely this whole thing is going to fill up, and there should have been back row Baptists in this church. But I sat in the back left-hand side, and then the church, all the people came in for the service, and so there was me and 20 empty rows and 5 full rows right up in front. Totally inconspicuous. I was hiding out really well. But anyway, after the service, the preacher, his name was Les, came up to me and said, do you know what's going to happen to you when you go to heaven and that sort of thing. Steve Dawson would have been proud of him. He did a good job. And I didn't, really even understand what he was saying, though, which is an interesting point to consider. I didn't understand the words of redemption. I didn't understand what salvation was. I didn't understand judgment, So he was speaking a foreign language to me, but I thought I'll listen to that. Now, that's more common in our culture than ever before. I was on an airplane on the way back from Aspen, where I gave a talk this past week, and there was a guy sitting next to me. He was about 35, kind of skateboarder-looking guy, and he was a production guy, and he was here in Birmingham to do some production on a BMX race and whatever. And he'd never been to church in his life, and his parents had never been to church in their life. And so I'm thinking, what can I say to drop something that might make him think? And the only thing I could come up with in our conversation that wouldn't be weird, is he said, I don't go to church, and he noticed what I was reading and what I was writing on my laptop. He said, I don't mean to be offensive. I said, look, I work in the news. You can't offend me. But anyway, and I dropped a little idea about hell to him. I said, if you're wrong at the end in your choice, there's an eternal reality of heaven or hell. Now he was convinced he was agnostic, not atheist. So he said, well, I think I'm good. I'm going to go to heaven. I said, well, okay, whatever, So we parted ways. But at Glen Memorial Baptist Church, the second encounter with extraordinary love, Les recognized that I was very sincere, and he said, hey, you know what? He said, why don't we get together and talk a little bit? And I can come over on Thursday night. Would you like to do that? And I said, sure. And he brought a book with me called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. Anybody heard of that text? It is a fantastic text for exploring the veracity of the Old and New Testament, the reliability of those documents to the testimony that they offer. And he spent the next year, every Thursday night, for 2 hours with me and my cousin, first establishing the veracity of the Old Testament, the reliability of it from internal and external evidences, and then the New Testament and the reliability of that as a valid document to determine whether or not the message was something I should listen to. And then the kicker was that he began to show me the prophecies fulfilled, the prophecies in the Old Testament of Christ fulfilled in the New Testament, how Jesus was the Messiah and how he came to die on our behalf and save us. And so that's when I bent my knee. It's just as real to me today as it was then. It never fades. It's amazing. I talk about it pretty regularly in a different kind of context. And it's so real. I mean, it is real. I came to Christ. My life was changed forever. It took a while to clean up all the mess, but some of the messes Jesus cleaned up just like that, which was very cool, because he wanted to make himself known to me in a very tangible way. And there are certain things that just disappeared out of my life, certain sins, certain proclivities, but then the rest of the mess took me another 20 years. The unfortunate part of this church, so that was the beautiful part, was that they were very anti-Catholic. And so as you might imagine, their anti-Catholic sentiments fit well within the grooves of my wounds from my childhood. And I figured out that all of you guys are heretics and Mary worshipers, and you're all sending people to hell. You didn't know that, did you? You ever heard anybody tell you that? So I was well indoctrinated into the evil of Catholicism, and it took a long time to unravel. The beginning of that unraveling began in my next encounter with extraordinary love. I became, of course, a Christian. I went and I thought, well, I want to give my life away to the church because my life changed so dramatically. And so I started listening to Dr. James Dobson on the radio. How many of you ever heard of him? Y'all know, do you know of a children's show called Adventures in Odyssey? Okay, so my closest friend is the producer of that, created that. And he eventually converted to Catholicism, but we work together at Focus on the Family. His name's Paul McCusker. Now he's working for the Augustine Institute. It's really fascinating. But while I was at Focus on the Family, I came to my third encounter with extraordinary love, and her name was Phyllis. Now, Phyllis was a lousy apologist. The way I know that is because I had a hatred for Catholicism. And you remember my nickname, right? It was still there at that time. That's where I got it, was at Focus on the Family. And so I would do what Paul and I call drive-bys. When you work in a Protestant organization and you're Catholic, you get what are called drive-bys. Now, he gets drive-bys because he's nice. When I was there, I never got drive-bys, but I gave them, to the one Catholic that was in the place. But after I converted, I never got them, and he did, but that's just kind of a humorous aside. But so I would just tell her, you're a Mary worshiper. I saw her as a wolf in sheep's clothing. I believe that she lied when she signed the statement of faith. I believe she was not authentic in her beliefs. And I believe that any exposure she had to other Christians would likely damage them and potentially send them to hell. And so I was not kind to Phyllis at every possible opportunity. Phyllis, after a few years, never tired of engaging me anyway. She was always responded with kindness. She always, instead of recoiling when I would say those things, she would always move in closer and ask me questions. And she would say, well, you want to go to the cafeteria and talk about that? And like I said, she was a lousy apologist, so I don't remember a single argument she ever gave. Then Phyllis was quitting, and there was a party for her, and I was still very negative in my feelings to her at that time. So we worked in one overall department, and I was in this little department here, and she was in this department here. So they're doing this big party thing, and somebody comes back and says, hey, Phyllis wants you to come to the party. I don't know if I'm going to get through this one either. And I'm thinking, I don't want to have any part of this. I got work to do. They said, no, you have to come. So I came into the room, and it was a room filled with about half the size of you guys, and there was high stools, or 5 stools sitting up in front, facing just like this. And I'm just thinking, what is going on here? So she put me in the first stool, and then there were 4 other people in the subsequent stools. And she began to talk about how my challenges to her deepened her faith. And then she took off my shoes and she washed my feet. She rewarded my vitriol and my attacks with a profound act of tenderness and love. Profound act. That moment, I knew that she was a better person than I was. And there was something wrong with my perspective. But the wounds were so deep that it took me, even then, 15 years to find my way to the church. Phyllis, like Pastor Les, was patient, kind. Les had more answers, Phyllis had none. But both were patient and kind and befriended me, or tried to show me the way. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. If there is no bridge, there will be no truth passing over. Fourth encounter with extraordinary love. As by this time I'm reading through church history and keep going deeper and deeper, and I end up in the Apostolic Fathers in a very funny way. You can hear it on EWTN's Journey Home. I've been on there a couple of times. But I came to the conclusion that apostolic succession was necessary for valid orders to offer the sacraments. And there were three bodies that claimed apostolic succession. One was the Orthodox, which I explored through auditing Orthodox seminary courses, and they loved Mary a lot, and that kind of freaked me out. So I kind of, I just couldn't get out of it. I actually tried to get over that with them, and I said, okay, let me just be objective and just hear what they're saying, and it didn't work. I was still too deep in my biases. And then the second was Catholicism, and there's no way I'm going to become Catholic. And the third was Anglicanism. So I began to study historic Anglicanism, and really was moved by, I was also Calvinist at the time theologically, if that means anything to you, like Dr. Hahn, similar road, Dr. David Anders. And the Anglican tradition married an ancient ecclesiology with a soteriology that I could stomach. So that is a Calvinistic view of how one is saved. So I was going to a seminary in North Carolina. I lived in Colorado, and I had to go back and forth. And the bishop said, well, you have to serve in a local Episcopalian parish. Now, I had converted to Anglicanism from a historical perspective, right? Which is, when I came into Episcopalian culture, it was a little different. So my bishop was an Anglo-Catholic bishop from Africa, which is a lot different than an Episcopalian bishop in the United States. A lot different cultural experience. So I was quite shocking. But I came into that parish, and I asked the pastor, I said, hey, can I teach a 9-month course? We'll get through the 39 articles, and we'll go through, and we'll compare and contrast Luther's view, Calvin's view, and the Catholic view, and the Anglican view of all of these different elements. And I had 2 priests attending that course. He agreed. I had 2 priests attending that course, and every week in the parish that I taught, it filled up more, and it filled up more, and it filled up more. I got more and more opposition too, all along the way. But the priest of the parish, the main priest, began to argue in a very gentle way, and he began to slip me CDs. This is an Episcopalian priest. He said, hey, you know what? This is a talk from Tim Gray. What do you think about that? I'm just curious to get your perspective. Hey, this is a talk from Scott Hahn. I'm just curious what your perspective might be. And then during the talks, after the talks, he would take me aside and he would just kind of say, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So Phil was very gentle in his approach. By the way, as you might guess, he was converting to Catholicism under Archbishop Chaput in Denver. But one day, Phil gave me a CD from a Catholic apologist that should have never been published, and because there were all kinds of errors in it, all kinds of false claims. And I got kind of irritated with him. And in my normal nuke fashion, still nuke then, even though I was wearing a cassock and a collar, God help me. And I said, you just need to keep this kind of junk to yourself. This is lame, and I told him why, whatever. So he was very wounded by it, and he said, I'm sorry, I'll never talk to you about Catholicism again, and I'm really sorry about that. And I realized I had offended him, but I was actually attacking the content of the thing, not him for doing it, right? And so I thought, well, I better meet, because he's a good man and he's just trying to help me or whatever. And I met with Phil, and I said, Phil, you have to understand, truth saved me. The truth as person, as Pope Benedict has said. And it means everything to me, because it's what keeps me and rescued me. It keeps me from and rescued me out of the darkness. So if you're going to give me scholarship about Catholicism, you have to understand that I want to believe all that God wants me to believe, and I don't care where it takes me. but it has to be the best. And I'm sorry for offending you. Just because people kick back and argue with you doesn't mean they don't agree with you. There's a lot of folks like me. The way I used to argue, I don't do it anymore. And if we have a Q&A, you don't need to worry. I don't have the nuke thing anymore. Most people think I'm pretty gentle. The way I used to argue was, if you proposed an argument that I was interested in, I would push back as hard as I could, because it meant so much to me that if I was going to accept your truth and change, that I needed to be convinced. What did that feel like on the other side? He doesn't want it. He doesn't like me. It's not always true, folks. Sometimes the most broken people are desperate for the truth. And they need you to wade through all the junk that they bring to the table relationally, intellectually, and spiritually, and to put up with it like Phil did. That fourth encounter with extraordinary love. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. Two final stories that are a little bit out of my own journey to Catholicism. I eventually came into the Catholic Church at Our Lady of Loretto Catholic Church in Parker, Colorado, on the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is a whole different story. Catholic mystical theology is what was kind of the last bridge for me. It widened the bridge just enough, answered questions that I couldn't get answered through Protestant spirituality. And then by accident, by divine appointment, really, I was received and confirmed on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And if you know anything about my work, it's very much about Carmelite spirituality. So I came into the church, but a couple of stories that further illustrate this point that I'm trying to make to you. My wife, who's sitting here with us today, actually made a priest break down and cry in the middle of a completely filled large parish event. He was a wonderful black Jesuit man who was just a blast to listen to. He's brilliant. And his father, who was an atheist, had put him into Catholic education system because it was the best education system. And of course, it had its effect on the young man, because he eventually became a priest. And so he's telling us, he's talking about the new translation of the Masses not too long ago. And he was telling us about his father and the end of his life. Before the end of his life, he had come to Christ, and he became a Baptist. And my wife stood up and raised her hand and asked him the question. And this is what made him begin to cry. She said, "Did you ask your dad why he became a Baptist rather than a Catholic? What might you think the answer was?" It's pretty simple. As he choked back the tears, he said that he had asked his father that. And his father said, "You never asked me. You never asked me." Probably what happened in that situation. And I think if that priest was honest, and I think he was pretty honest, and I think I heard some reflection of this, is you got to love the other person more than the fear. That love that you have for the other person has to overcome the fear and reticence you have to deal with whatever their reaction might be on the other end. You have to love them more than you love yourself. The sad part is, I think his son built a bridge, but he was too scared to push the truth across. And he mourns over it. The last story I want to tell you is about my stepfather, Mel. Another one that's a little hard for me to get through. So my mother married my biological father. They divorced when I was young just to make life fun for us kids. And then she remarried that dangerous guy, and they got divorced. And then my mother got it right the third time. A beautiful Jewish man, super nice guy. Gave away one of his kidneys to his brother, who was an alcoholic, and had burned through his. And then he got kidney cancer on the one left. So they live in this little community in Florida. You know those little communities in Florida? Surrounded by Baptists who loved the heck out of them. Lifting stuff that's too heavy, moving stuff, solving problems. One of the Baptist guys was an ex-cop, just the neatest guy, protecting, witnessing to Christ through their lives. So Mel's cancer got to an advanced stage where the doctor said, "We cannot do anything more for you. You're going to die soon, and I'd like you to die as peacefully as possible." They decided on at-home hospice in my mother's home, in their home. And the neighbors came knocking on the door. And said, "We need to talk to Mel." My mom said, "What about? We'd like to share the gospel with him." He waved him in. Jewish guy. Jewish all of his life. Agnostic, really. Practicing. Sounds weird, it's normal. It's called Reform Judaism. So they went back and shared the gospel with him. As they're leaving, after they left, my mom said, "Why the hell did you let him do that?" And he said, "They earned it. They earned it. They've been good to us. It's right to give them the opportunity to tell me about what's most important, because that's an act of love on their part. And it would be an injustice for me not to let them share." I do not know what happened in his soul, but I do know that those Baptists built a bridge of love. That this man who never had any inclination to Christ or Christianity welcomed to his ears, to his hearing. I think a lot of times we want to preach the gospel. We want the quick formula. We want the one thing we can say, the stinger that'll just convince them all. Friends, it just doesn't work that way. If you want to make a difference in evangelism, you want to bring people to Christ and closer to Christ, if you're not willing to lay your life down to build that bridge, you are wasting your time. But if you're willing to lay your life down, if you're willing to finish your work early so you can help that other person and spend time with them, if you're willing to risk being rejected, let me give you just an outline of what I think is a good path, a program for evangelization. Just a few points. The first one is learn the gospel. Contemplate the gospel. And the book I'd recommend to you to bring clarity to that is Evangelizing Catholics by Scott Hahn. And I'm sorry if you didn't buy it yesterday. I should have recommended it yet, but I wasn't talking, so it wouldn't have mattered. It has I read it this morning, and in the back side, or in the last part of the book, it has a great framework for how you can communicate the gospel. And the way that I would communicate the gospel in a Catholic context is just 4 simple ideas. That we were created in love. We were broken but still loved. We were restored in love. And now we reveal that reality through love. Created in love, broken in love, restored in love, and revealed through love. The model to understand that approach to the gospel, if you want to meditate on that from Christ's own words, read the story of the prodigal son. We have a man broken. Now, a lot of you have kids. Has there ever been a time when you had your little guys or girls who did something wrong that your love waned for them? I love the picture in the prodigal son that the father was just waiting. He was staring out in the distance, waiting for his son to return. And when he did, it's a party. Some who think they're doing evangelism think that Jesus was teaching evangelism when he was flipping over the tables in the temple. I have no doubt that the devil loves that idea of evangelism, because it doesn't work. It isn't what we're called to. We're called to treat people with dignity and respect. We're called to exercise patience. We're called to give our lives away. God can flip tables in a temple. That's not what we're called to do. Your relationship with God, you got to get that right, which begins with a proper orientation to the sacraments, of course, but very, very importantly is mental prayer, daily mental prayer. The most important form, in my opinion, is Lectio Divina. Why is that? Because you're getting to know Jesus. If you do not know Jesus, you cannot share Jesus. Because if you talk about intellectual concepts with somebody, they know you don't know. If you don't, you got to get to know Christ. A great book I'd recommend to everyone who's in evangelization. It's called The Spiritual Handbook for Catholic Evangelists. Spiritual Handbook for Catholic Evangelists. Don Jean Baptiste Chautard. I think he's French. Fantastic text. Get some clarity on your own conversion story. Now, this is where you're going to go, well, yeah, but I didn't get to go through what you went through. Praise God for that. And my story's not all that interesting. Been a Catholic all my life. Well, you better know when and how you say yes to Christ. You know you're all called to conversion, right? Until when? Until when? Till you see him face to face. How many times? How many times? Over and over and over again. Every day you have a choice to say yes or no to God. I don't care who you are or where you come from. Why do you say yes? Why does it matter to you? Why are you here? You think you don't have a testimony. That's not true. What you need to do is learn to share how God is working in your life and your own conviction. If you ask Steve Dawson, who's head of an incredible ministry, St. Paul Street Outreach, he'll tell you he talks to people about heaven and hell all the time, right off the street, people he doesn't know. But he has a very powerful way of doing it, because what he does is he shares from his experience. He said, well, this is what happened to me, and this is how I see it. So he's not dumping it on people. He's trying to draw them into his own story, which is what? The reality of Christ in him. That's not preaching, in my opinion. I don't know if Steve would agree with me. That's not preaching. That's building a bridge of love. That's saying, hey, I care about you. Can I share with you how I've come to know this reality? Get your conversion story straight. How have you encountered God? Get your communication skills right. A secular book that I think is extraordinary is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was written about 3 billion years ago when I was young by Dale Carnegie. The book could be better entitled, How to Love People Purposefully, changed, by the way, it denuked me in many ways. Christ and that book taught me how to treat people with dignity and respect. Not to manipulate them, but to love them as he desired. Get your communication skills right, and then be deliberate in your self-giving. That means you got to work hard at it, you got to be purposeful about it, and you got to go out and meet people on purpose where there's need. Love builds a bridge over which truth can pass. 1 Corinthians 13 says this, "If I speak in the tongue of men and of angels, but I have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. It's not jealous. It's not boastful. It's not arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrong, but rejoices in the right. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away, for our knowledge is imperfect, and our prophecy is imperfect. But when the perfect comes, the imperfect will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall understand fully, even as I have been fully understood. So faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.